Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to CPAD's event presented by the Graduate Teaching Practicum, Life After Graduation, a panel discussion by recent Art Education Ph.D. graduates. I would like to welcome Jeffrey Cornwall, Melissa Leaym-Fernandez, Luke Meeken, Lauren Stetz, and Zena Tredinnick-Kirby. My name is Zena Tredinnick-Kirby, and I'm a School of Visual Arts online faculty, and I work for the Office of Digital Learning, and I will be moderating this panel discussion. We will begin. We will have several questions that I will ask the panel, which they will respond to, and at the end we will have Q&A and discussion. So, question number one. Please introduce yourself and briefly share your professional experience before starting the Art Education doctoral program, your overall experience with the program, and your dissertation research. So we're beginning with Jeff.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. And as the first person, I'll say thank you for coming. Again, my name is Jeff Cornwall. The thing that I like to say about my past experience is part of the reason I got into art education was because I didn't have an art education. And so the story of how I became an art educator is a story for another day. But after receiving a bachelor's in art education, I worked as an elementary art teacher for 6 years. When I did my undergraduate program, I thought I was pretty set on doing the secondary level, but I ended up getting a job in elementary and just really became fascinated by that space and by working with young children. While I was teaching, I participated in an art education master's program that was designed for practicing art teachers. And I really enjoyed that because I would take classes nights and weekends, and then Monday I'd go in and just start experimenting with a lot of these theories and ideas. In the last semester of that program, I was invited to teach an undergraduate course as adjunct faculty. And I continued teaching that course after I graduated for 2 more years while I was teaching at the elementary school. And then the day came, sadly, when I left the elementary school, but gladly came to Penn State. And I had a really wonderful experience studying at Penn State, taking coursework from amazing scholars in both the School of Visual Arts as well as the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. And that led to a minor in that area. And during my studies, I was able to compose a really thoughtful and caring doctoral committee that pushed my thinking and my research. My dissertation research was situated between the field of childhood studies and elementary art education. And in my dissertation research, I used theories of affect to explore children's bodily ways of learning, thinking, making, and doing that happens alongside and through the official curriculums of the elementary classroom.
Thank you, Jeff. We will move on to Melissa.
Hi, everybody, and thank you again for coming. I'm Melissa Leaym-Fernandez. My journey was obviously different from Jeff's, as all of ours are. I'm kind of a late bloomer. I survived some serious marginalization and childhood trauma, and so that kind of shifted my life pretty dramatically, inside out and upside down. I found that throughout my life, I was always creative and making and doing creative things. And so that really kind of impacted what I did later in life. As a non-traditional person, I kind of went to college a little bit later than my peers. And then it was for my undergraduate studies. But I found that I was drawn to communities that were marginalized like I was. I taught in Detroit, Michigan. I taught in Flint and was there during the height of the ongoing water crisis, was lead poisoned with my students and their families and had to go through all of that. I volunteered as an art instructor and a teaching artist in India and worked with the leprosy affected there as a volunteer. So I've had a really diverse kind of background in art education. I've taught at the community college here in town and done different things. I really was drawn to doing more and finding out how structurally we could change what's done for marginalized families through art education. And my husband encouraged me. He's like, why don't you get a PhD? Because then you can teach in a different way and at a higher level and do what you want to do. And so as I started that journey to kind of find a program, I remember going to one of the universities here in Michigan and was actually told by the representative I was speaking with that, well, why would I do that? Like, what would be the purpose of me getting a PhD? Because I'm married and I have kids. And that really kind of lit the fire under me and was very frustrating, as if to say that women who are married and with children shouldn't have or couldn't do or shouldn't waste their time getting a PhD. So not finding a program in the state that I really wanted or liked, I made my circle a little bit bigger and was eventually led to Penn State. And one of the things that I really loved about the program and the initial contact that I had was this real sense of comfortableness and this sense of welcoming. And that eventually, of course, led to my application and my entry into the program, where I found, like in life, right, a diversity of personalities that gave me these great opportunities to fall in love with those that were wonderful and to learn how to deal with those that weren't. And that's kind of life, right? Like that doesn't change because we enter a PhD program. It just seems maybe sometimes like it's more heightened or more challenging because we're in such an intense pot of cooking as we get our degree. But I found those life experiences really kind of powerful and motivating for me to get my degree. I loved having all these different people from all over the world, and I really loved being able to mentor other students in the program that were from outside of the US. Our family is very diverse, and so we've had experiences in and out of the US. And I really like that element of the program that I was allowed to mentor and help others and learn from them. It wasn't just that I was sharing to them, but they were sharing back to me. And I really appreciated those insights. My research for my dissertation focused on women artists of color over 40 in the United States that had ACEs or adverse childhood experiences, and how they used art education to overcome and manage the lifelong and intergenerational impacts and outcomes of that childhood trauma. I also, as many that know me, know that I do additional research, as I did take courses and minored in the Women's Studies program at Penn State. I look at gender representations, modernities of gender representations in East and South Asian media, which basically means I've watched about 300 complete K-pop, C-pop, T-pop television series, and then I write about different data points that are represented in that visual media.
Thank you, Melissa. We will move on to Luke now.
Hi, my name is Luke Meeken. So yeah, I guess background, I received my bachelor's, actually a BFA in studio art at Carnegie Mellon. It's a school that was founded by a robber baron and had a very kind of like capitalist ethos, and there wasn't any sort of education program in any of the schools, much less an art education program within the art school. There's a very Shavian, like those who can do sort of attitude that sort of permeated that institution. But I found, like, during my time there, right, child art making and developmental psychology became really important parts of like my own research into my own studio art practice. So after my undergrad time, I found myself gravitating to various teaching vocations that I could do without a teaching license, right? I did English language learning overseas in Prague and in Moscow, and I worked in early childhood education as a preschool co-teacher for 3 years in Pennsylvania. And in all those experiences, I kept encountering ways that like my arts background was inflecting my pedagogy or informing it, or things were happening through art, even if I wasn't disciplinarily teaching an art subject, right? And so I went on to get my master's in art education at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. And I actually had an inverse of Jeff, where I came in thinking I was all about early childhood because I had been working with these really wonderful young people in Pennsylvania. And I thought that was 100% what I wanted to focus on. But after my master's work, I found myself teaching high school, public high school for 4 years just outside Richmond, teaching both digital and traditional media. And I found digital media had always been a part of my personal art practice, and it became more of a focus in my teaching and research practice during my master's work, thanks to the mentorship of Ryan Patton, who is a PSU alum who is there. And so, yeah, and since then, yeah, I was teaching in high school. I also taught and developed summer camp stuff with digital work at the Smithsonian that began informing my teaching in my public school classroom and my own kind of research, and led to me going to conferences and presenting on curriculum that I've been developing on digital stuff. And I encountered in those experiences a lot of hunger from K through 12 art educators who knew what a big role the digital played in their students' day-to-day lives, but didn't feel totally equipped to engage with it in their own teaching. And so they were coming to like presentations like the ones I was giving and other folks were giving. And that kind of encouraged me to return to school, to continue my scholarship, thinking about digital materials and art ed, and also potentially to teach future teachers and maybe address this gap that I was noticing in art teacher education amongst a lot of the teachers that I would see at conferences and things like that. And so I started my PSU doctoral work in the fall of 2018. And at Penn State, my dissertation research focused on the ways that art educators might cultivate critical sensitivities to the ideologically laden material agencies of the digital. That's my log line. I aimed to deploy this concept of critical sensitivities to complement the idea of critical literacies that gets talked about a lot with like digital media and media education. To think more about the ways that digital materials act on our bodies and habituate behaviors and sensibilities and comportments on our bodies. My dissertation specifically looked at the ways that digital places habituate colonizing sensibilities of place, and the ways art educators might cultivate critically sensitive pedagogies towards them. And so I did a study during my teaching at the Smithsonian and analyzed both student placemaking and a digital placemaking camp I co-developed, as well as my own placemaking as I created materials for that camp. I want to make sure we have time for everyone to talk, so I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you so much, Luke. Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren Stetz, and thank you again for coming today. A little bit first about my experience. My background, actually, I was an undergraduate at Penn State many, many years ago. And so it was really wonderful to come back as a graduate student as part of the PhD program. I actually had several professors that were here during my undergraduate degree that I got to return and work with as a PhD student. So I completed my undergraduate in art education with a minor in art history at Penn State. After that, I actually went and taught in Fairfax County Public Schools in Northern Virginia, where I taught primarily at a secondary level within middle school and a combined middle and high school. And that's one of the largest counties in the country. School districts. And so I had a lot of opportunities working within that school district to work with a lot of really talented teachers, as well as work on curriculum development. While I was a teacher at Fairfax County, I actually completed my master's degree, which is in art history at George Mason. And I looked at specifically at Latin American art. And so I was really excited to do that during my work as a teacher. I actually had a bit of a career gap when I had my daughter around 2012. And then when I returned to teaching, I actually decided to go in and work at a preschool level with her. So I took a job as a Reggio Emilia inspired preschool teacher, also a co-teacher, much like Luke, working with somebody who works in early childhood. And so I did that for a year in Washington, DC, and that was a really wonderful experience. But one thing that I found was after I had worked at all these many different grade levels, I had worked from pre-K to college level. I actually worked as an adjunct at the College of Southern Maryland, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do next. I had always thought about returning for my PhD. A lot of people had encouraged me to go and become a principal, but I never had really saw myself in that role. So it was exciting to look at the program at Penn State and to think about coming back here where actually my family still lives. So it was wonderful to reconnect with all of those professors and join the program. While I was in the program, like the others have mentioned, I really enjoyed working with the large variety of students here, really being inspired by the faculty, and had some really amazing experiences. I actually worked with Dr. Karen Kiefer-Boyd in one of my first semesters to really establish what went on to be my doctoral dissertation, where I look at artists around the world and how they were addressing violence against women through their work using a transnational lens. So that was a really exciting research study that I got to do for my dissertation, focusing on how artists can really empower themselves through their work, how they respond to trauma through their art, and how they can work together in coalitional ways to really produce societal change and create awareness.
Thank you, Lauren. We will move on to Zena.
Hello, my name is Zena Tredinnick-Kirby, and my art journey began in high school when I realized that I really didn't want to do any other subject except be in the darkroom. So photography really was the starting point for me for my art career. Graduated high school and went to the Art Institute of Philadelphia and received a degree in photography. It was a dream to be a sideline sports photographer for ESPN. Very quickly realized that being a woman in the sports industry, especially in photography on the sidelines, was very difficult. So that was kind of my first eye-opening experience with being a woman in the field of art. Because of that, I decided that with this passion that I had for art, that I should teach it, and that stability of having a teacher's position. So I went to the College of New Jersey and I did a dual degree in art education and art history with a minor in geology. And the reason for that was because being exposed in art history to so many different mediums that you deal with, I felt like the geological route was a really good idea, which still to this day I'm passionate about. From there, I taught for 10 years, and ironically, I went back to where I fell in love with art. So I taught at the high school that I graduated from with my boss, who was my mentor and my kind of my idol, where it all started. So I taught there for 10 years, teaching AP art history and AP photography. I was able to rewrite the curriculum with College Board, the company of art history that gets redesigned every 5 years. And it was during that time that I felt like I wanted to do more in a deeper connection with education, and how could my role as an educator really transform these students. So I applied to Penn State's World Campus program, the Master's of Professional Studies in Art Education. And that's where I met Karen Kiefer-Boyd in 2016. And our journey together is still going strong. So I had such a wonderful experience with the online program, and that's kind of where I am today, kind of giving it back to Penn State. But I graduated and was offered a full fellowship when I received my master's from Penn State for the PhD program. I uprooted my 2 children and my husband. We moved out to State College, and kind of the rest is history. My experience with the program at Penn State has just been really incredible. I felt the growth that I had received from my master's program at Penn State, like how could it be any more? But in the PhD program, it was so evident and visible. Working alongside just these amazing scholars, and just saying the name of part of Penn State Art Education Program wherever you go, whether it be Columbia, the Teachers College, and your professor's names being dropped, like, oh, Dr. And I don't want Karen to get blush here or anything, but going around and just saying these professors' names, it's really amazing how the art education program, while I was in it, was something so transformative, but then now being out of it and still talking about it, it's kind of like I have to pinch myself. Is this real? Is this real life? Did it occur? But during the program, I did grow. I dabbled a little bit in women's studies. It was just not for me. But I did happen to really connect with the curriculum and instruction department and program. Dr. Kissling, to be exact, really kind of made me look at curriculum and how curriculum is created and so on, which led me to my research. So my research was really connecting all of my passions together. So the methodology that I used was photo voice, where photos became my core reason, how I collected data. And it was transforming homeschool, which I homeschooled my children prior to my research. But since they were a part of my journey, it only made sense for them to be a part of my research. So what we did was site specific to our home, where I created an art residency, a feminist art residency with my children. And we looked at our homeschooling in a completely different way of creating art together. And the curriculum was emergent from my children's passions. And it was changing and shifting all the time, but it was really guided by care ethics, by Dr. Nell Nodding's care ethics. So the 4 key components in care ethics is modeling care, dialogue, which is listening to them and not coming to conversations and educational encounters with an outcome, but what was just derived during it, practice and confirmation. So that led and guided my research. So it was really amazing to have my research transform my children's education and my own, which is still currently happening.
Great, thank you so much, Zena. We will move on to the next question. Question number 2. Please explain your job application process. What steps did you take? What worked and what didn't? We will start with Jeff.
So when I decided to leave my position as an elementary art teacher, it was a big choice because it was a decision to like shift my career from K through 12 teaching and really making a decision to enter the world of academia. So when I entered the program at Penn State, I generally knew where and how I would exit. So as I anticipated the application process, I tried to prepare and learn as much as I could. The thing that helped me the most was I was good friends with another art education graduate student who was a couple of years ahead of me in the program. And a year before I planned to enter the job market, I met with this colleague to get advice. And I asked a lot of questions like, what websites do you use for finding positions? Like, how do letters of reference work? And what materials are required for the application process? And I started to gather some of those materials. And that year, the year before, I kind of kept my finger on the pulse of the job market, just kind of looking for positions, seeing what was out there. When the next year came around, I already felt somewhat comfortable with the application process. It was still a ton of work to gather and create all the materials. And I was also finishing my dissertation at the same time. So when people say that applying for jobs is a part-time job, it's true. As I was working on my materials, I requested feedback on them from a lot of different people. I would send, hey, here's my cover letter. Here's my CV. Can I get some good feedback? As I searched for positions, I created a spreadsheet, and I'm not a spreadsheet person, but it was really helpful. I added each position that I was interested in. And then working with my partner, we carefully decided which positions we would apply for. We were pretty open to locations. We were looking, there was a couple jobs overseas and in Canada. We decided to stick to the United States, but we were pretty open to where in the United States. And we ended up applying to positions all over the country. If there wasn't anything particularly attractive about a position, like the program or the location or any amenities of the area, we chose not to apply. After my first couple interviews, I discovered that I wasn't very good at interviewing. My interviewing skills were lacking. So I decided to practice with colleagues by doing mock interviews before each interview. And then my partner would like quiz me like right before I would like hop onto a Zoom call for an interview. And slowly I became more confident and competent as I practiced and had more interviews. And for full transparency, I identified 31 application possibilities for the 2021-2022 job market. I applied to 15 different positions. I had 6 first-round Zoom interviews, and then I had 2 campus visits.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Melissa.
So like Jeff, I too had some really big decisions to make before I started. I came to Penn State my first year alone. My husband and our 3 children were in Michigan. And so, and then subsequently spread out over the country. So we had, while I was in my program, a daughter in Utah, and then one in Virginia. And then my second year in the program, our youngest son, Max, who was in high school, came and lived with me on campus. And so we had kind of this demographic of everybody being spread out, which in all the years I've been with my partner, we have not been apart for more than 10 days. So coming to Penn State was huge. And so when I was ready to start job hunting, we made a list of what we wanted. And I highly recommend that you do that. Like, what do you want out of a job? Where do you want to be? What kind of location? What if you just list your dream job and have it there? The other thing that was really good, and it kind of sounds similar to what Jeff did, is a little bit different, but Scott suggested that I keep a list, and I had it on my desktop, of everything that I'm doing. So if I volunteered to help an organization on campus, I put it in the list with the date. If I served in like GATA, which is our club, our professional organization in the department for grad students, and I served as the treasurer for the first year of that was volunteering, I put that on the list. If I made a presentation, I put it on the list. I just put these random things in so that later I could sharpen up and focus my resume, my CV. Don't think you're going to remember everything. You won't. Your brain will melt a couple times during your program, and you will have to just have a place to just dump the stuff. And you may find later, oh, that wasn't that significant in my journey, and leave it out. But have a running list of what you're doing. And if you publish something, a little article, put it in there and then straighten it all up later. You will find in the program that you are required to do an annual report. And I never even thought about this until Karen pointed this out to me my last year, was that, yeah, when you have a job, you do this. And I thought, oh yeah, that's why Scott told me to make this list, because every 5 years he has to do this huge report of all the service he's done, all the activity he's done in the community, what professional development he's done. And so if you have this running list, that totally prepares you to be ready to go when you're ready to look for job applicants. Jeff's going to make me look bad because I didn't do any math. I didn't keep track of the data. But, you know, I did keep a track like he did of all the places I applied to. I was selected for 2 final interviews. And when I did finally get my job, it was very exciting to call 3 that I was still being considered for and thank them and pull myself out of the running. So that gets kind of exciting when you're prepared. I'm really comfortable talking to people. That's not a challenge for me at all. One of the interviews I had, one of the people speaking said, oh, should we ask specific questions off of our list? And one of the other interviewees said, well, no, as she's been telling us stories, I've been checking off things on the list. She's been answering the questions like in her stories. So if you know that you struggle talking about your work, yourself, your research, then I highly suggest that you either work with a friend, a partner, a club, an organization on campus, so that you can hone those skills, because they want people they can talk to and that communicate well. You're working with human beings. And so that's something you need to be comfortable and feel strong with. So if that's not your thing, then that's my suggestion. For our family and our needs, I did make that list of what I wanted, and we limited our search to the Eastern Seaboard. So all the universities and colleges that I applied to were on the Eastern Seaboard, and then I ended up getting a position right in my hometown. So that's kind of been my journey.
Thank you, Melissa. We will move on to Luke.
Yoki. So yeah, under the advice of my advisor, I applied to everything I could. and to do that, I kind of set weekly reminders in my calendar to check the 2 websites he recommended, which I'll name because it might be helpful for folks: Academic Keys and Higher Ed Jobs. And each week I would check in to see if there are any postings. I would download any postings as PDFs to a file on my computer, and I organized them into a separate folder for each job. So that kind of became my to-do list, right? And I'd set aside time each week during my kind of writing and teaching schedule. This was during like that last year of dissertating. And I'd set aside time each week to fill out and submit application materials. As folks mentioned, the applications typically required a lot of stuff, right? And needed significant time to prepare that stuff. So in my job hunt folder where I had all these job postings saved as PDFs, I also had a subfolder of what I call vanilla documents that would likely end up in a lot of applications. And these included an updated CV or resume, a teaching statement, a diversity statement, a skeleton of a cover letter with like areas marked in bright yellow that I could update and adjust to make more specific for each application. But like the sort of bio stuff about myself would probably stay the same. And my list of references. And whenever a specific application asked for a new document that I didn't have a vanilla version of, I'd save a vanilla version of that into my document. And those might be things like a portfolio of student work or a research statement, which not everybody asked for, but enough places asked for that I kept one on hand. So for each application, I would pull the relevant documents from my vanilla file, revise and update them to suit the particular job, and then submit them. And sometimes this was a pretty straightforward process, but also you don't want to seem or be inauthentic in that process as much as you need to make it efficient, because we're all quite busy. And like Jeff said, it's a full-time job or a significant job, right? So it took time, right, to make those things relevant and to like communicate, right, my legitimate interest in these positions with these materials I had. So then for the initial kind of Zoom interviews for the folks that got back to me for those, I also prepared a basic Word document kind of as a way of rehearsing that included kind of drafts for 3-minute long answers to common interview questions. Those questions are, and we're recording so you can refer back to this, right? Why do you want this job? Why are you interested in this institution? Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your research and its future directions. Tell us about your teaching experiences. And what questions do you want to ask us? Lots of other places ask lots of different questions, but those were pretty consistent across all my interviews. So you want to have something prepared to respond to those lines of inquiry, right? Yeah, some other somewhat common questions they wound up kind of adding to my list were: how do you engage with community in your teaching? What are your personal art interests? And how do you address diversity, equity, inclusion in your teaching? Those were less common, but pretty common. So in this doc that I put together for each interview, I also included some basic research on the institution, like demographics of the students there, whether they had a grad program, the research interests of the folks on the search committee, and or the notable faculty, even if they were on the committee. And that became kind of my cheat sheet to prepare and rehearse for the interview. And I kind of would have it on hand during the interview as well. And kind of like with my vanilla application stuff, I would hang on to that and I could kind of reuse and remix it for different interviews. And yeah, I think in the interest of transparency, like Jeff, while Melissa was talking, I crunched some numbers. So before I wrap up, I'll just say, similar to Jeff, I had 21 applications, out of which there were 9 initial Zoom interviews, out of which there were 3 on-campus visitations, like the second stage interview. But the job I'm at actually didn't have an on-campus visitation. So those 3 weren't the ones that led to where I'm at right now, but we'll talk about that in a future question.
Thank you so much, Luke. We will move on to Lauren.
So my process was somewhat similar to some other people's, but it started a little bit later. I actually I'm a parent of a 4th grader currently, was a 3rd grader while I was finishing my dissertation. And I was on a mission to finish my dissertation in the spring, which took really all of my energy in order to finish. And so that was my priority. Unfortunately, applying for jobs at the time kind of was put on the back burner for finishing the dissertation. So I was not really able to do those things simultaneously during my final year due to outside commitments. So this year I have been working as a student teacher, a substitute teacher locally at the school district where my daughter works, and really taking the time to look through the application process. And my process has been very similar to Luke's in terms of really seeing all of the things that are out there, going and seeing what application materials are being asked for. It has been a nice luxury to not be doing my dissertation as I've been writing those letters. I don't know if that's always the best order to do things or not, but it did work for me quite well. And as Luke did, I kind of had that vanilla envelope folder of things that can be redrafted according to the different places that I was looking at. One of the questions that I did have a lot that I guess Luke had less of is I had diversity and equity and inclusion as a real focus in most of the interviews that I've encountered so far. And they were really interested, the committees were very interested in how not only that was carried through your research, but throughout your teaching. If I can think about something that I would have done earlier in my academic career, is I really, I think it's really smart that Jeff really looked into what materials were being required for applications really early on within his PhD program. That's not something that I had a lot of knowledge of until later. And I was pulling things together. I think if the earlier you see what universities are looking for, the earlier you can be gathering those materials and putting them together. And like how Melissa said, making that list and assembling things so you don't forget them at the end. So I think those were all really wonderful pieces of advice.
Thank you, Lauren. Let's move on to Zena.
So similar to what Melissa had said and Lauren, being moms, our family needs were really important, especially for having young children. Lauren and I actually, we saw our children grow during the program. So that was beautiful to have somebody who had young children, go through the program together. But yeah, so for me, it was my family's needs. My husband works for the government and has a very, very stable job. And his location was really necessary for us to stay where we are in New Jersey. So location played a huge part in our family needs. So I did the math similar to Jeff and Luke, and I can be the comic here, and I did 0 applications. So I want to stress that, like what Lauren said, I had no energy at all to apply anywhere. And, everyone's needs and everything are different, but my focus was being able to complete a PhD in 4 years while homeschooling 2 children. And that in itself was enough for me. So to expel any energy anywhere else, I just physically and mentally did not have it. So the one thing during the program though, and this is my advice, is that I started to network very early on in the program. So I, with at the time, Professor Carpenter's permission, I started working at where I got my undergrad at, so the College of New Jersey. So my second year at Penn State, I started working with pre-service teachers. And that was a job that I knew I was going to continue once I graduated because it was within 15 minutes of my home. And it was a potential job for the future for me. So it was everything that I needed. And it worked well and it made me happy. So at the time, I just kind of knew that I didn't want to exhaust any energy into applications, that if I didn't get a job right away and my job was the homeschooling and pre-service teachers as an adjunct for a couple of years until I figured it out, I was okay with that. And that was something that my husband and I both as a partnership agreed upon. So for me, my suggestion is just to really focus on, what makes you happy and what your needs are, and that you don't need to apply to all these jobs if you just don't have the energy, or if that's not what you see is for your future.
Great. Thank you so much, Zena. We will move on to the next question. Please tell me, where are you now? What are your future plans? Jeff.
So I am currently an assistant professor of art education at Colorado State University. It is a tenure track position. I plan to continue engaging in the practices and scholarships within my field of art education through teaching, research, and service. I'm working with several national groups in regards to research and service in the field of art education. And I hope now that I'm here in Colorado that I can become more involved in the local community, including the public education system of Northern Colorado and the state in general.
Thank you, Jeff. Melissa?
So for me, I just want to suggest and throw out there to everybody, it's okay to look outside of academia. You may find the dream job of your life outside of academia, and that's okay. As I mentioned, had applied all over places in the Eastern Seaboard and had been away from my partner for 4 years, which was really kind of challenging, and I didn't really like it. And so, but the reality was I needed to go where the jobs were and where I got a job. And after leaving Penn State, I came home. And while I was still dealing with those applications, he said, why don't you check out the local high school and see if there are any job openings? And I thought, I don't want to go back to high school. I have a PhD. And so it's like, I'll just call and check it out. And I said, okay. So I did. And I called and talked to the HR director and I said, hey, I have a PhD in art education. This is my teaching experiences from the past. I've got about 15 years of teaching experience all over. Would you be interested in having a conversation about this high school position? And she was so excited, so excited. She's like, yes, I would. Will you send me your CV? And I said, yes, I will. And then she's like, let me call the principal, let him know. I'm going to send this to him. I think we'd like to set up an interview with you. It was very quick. And I was really excited. I do want to say that they totally lowballed me financially. And I said, absolutely not. And I said, while we were talking, after I had successfully passed an interview and they offered me the position, I said, so do you really think that's what I'm worth? And I made her sit a little bit in her uncomfortability, and I actually up getting the salary that I wanted. And it is a tenure track position, and I'm really excited about that. For me, I wanted to be home. I wanted to be here. All the universities are 2 hours or more away from me, which would mean a second apartment, a second household again, which didn't really fit in with our goals. And so this job works for me. Also, I am publishing. I am finishing up my second book chapter. I really like doing book chapters. I really like publishing. Having this real experience, this lived experience in an active classroom allows me to keep my knowledge active and put it to good use, but also working in publishing, it helps me to keep my toe in the field of academia. I'm working on 2 different books, one on my dissertation research and one on my East Asian studies, gender representational, that research. So I'm getting ready to start working on those chapters on my own. So I'm doing what I want to do in the space that I want to do it. And I'm really happy doing that.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Luke?
Yeah, so right now I'm in a 1-year position as a temporary assistant professor of art ed. I'm actually the sole art ed specialist at Bridgewater State University here. It's a teaching focused institution in southeastern Massachusetts on the stolen land of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts people. I teach the core art ed curriculum here, as well as some of the studio coursework in the art and art history department, mainly the digital media studio work. And I'm also serving on the curriculum and the graduate committees, which has been a really wonderful window into the structure of an academic department and some of like the administrative responsibilities and going on there. It's been really wonderful here at Bridgewater. The majority of the students are students who I think in other institutions be classified as non-traditional, but they are the norm here. More than half the students are first generation students. And so the students I get to work with bring a really wonderful right perspective and relationship to education as an institution that I haven't encountered in other pre-service teachers that I've worked with before. And so there's like really wonderful pedagogical opportunities that I've been excited about. The students I've been working with are wonderful. So this job offer was actually fairly late in coming, right? I mentioned this elaborate system and all these things I was doing. And after an exhausting year of doing that while writing a dissertation, right? And traveling to campuses to like present and be observed for the couple of ones that wanted me to do that. I didn't actually get an actual offer until July, at which point I actually received 2 offers, one in Texas and one in Massachusetts. And as the rubber was hitting the road and hearing what other people said, maybe we should have done this earlier, but my partner and I sat down and we're kind of like consulting our possibilities, and we decided that Massachusetts was the better option for us. In short, my partner has a uterus and multiple disabilities, and going to Texas might kill her or make her life miserable. It would not be great. So we undertook a whirlwind apartment hunt and a move during the month of July to start working in August. So we're both settling into the job and the locale, though the move took a lot out of us financially and energetically. So we're not looking forward to having to move again. But because this position is a one-year position, I am on the job market again, right? So now I'm not applying for jobs while I'm dissertating. I'm applying for jobs while working full-time, which is not easier, but at least I have experience under my belt, right? Including applying for the tenure track version of my current position at this institution, which I'm doing this afternoon after this, or interviewing. I feel I have to be more selective now, as I have less schedule flexibility for travel and interviews, right? Because I have more courses that I'm teaching and more responsibilities here, but also because my partner and I know kind of more acutely what parts of the country it's actually feasible for us to move to, both in terms of like the cost of the move, but also the logistics of the move and the health infrastructure of the places we're going for her health needs. I'm also keeping in mind what other plans I might have if none of the applications this year do pan out, right? So thinking about reactivating my Virginia teaching license and transferring it to Massachusetts through reciprocity to teach K-12 as a possibility, right? I'm open to different potentials and possibilities there. I'm also fortunate here. It's a teaching focused institution, but I do have opportunities to continue my research. I had the opportunity to develop a new course this semester on digital materials and places in art education, and got IRB approval to collect data on the work the pre-service teachers are doing in that class. So it's providing another kind of lens or facet to the research I was doing in my dissertation with these pre-service folks. And I'm presently working on translating my dissertation work into articles for publication, and then anticipate using this new data for further kind of reflection and writing down the line as well. So that truck is still rolling. That's a bad metaphor, but I'm good.
Thank you so much, Luke. We will move on to Lauren.
Okay. So like I said, I'm currently a substitute teacher locally in State College, and this is where my daughter goes to school. So it's been really wonderful to get back into the classroom and to really take all of the knowledge that I've had in the PhD program and bring it back into my teaching. And also to have that time to reconnect with my daughter after working so hard throughout the PhD program. So it's been really wonderful to be available for her after school, and to have that flexibility this year has been terrific. As Zena said, networking is very important, and I was very lucky that Zena actually connected me with an adjunct online teaching position at the University of the Arts. So your colleagues within the program can also be really helpful in working together to find positions as well. So I'm currently working with a master's capstone student on graduate research, and I'm also working on with the director of the program to develop the art education curriculum, both within the undergraduate portion and the master's portion of the program. So that has been a really exciting opportunity for me that is going to continue over the summer as well. Because I was very involved through my research assistantship at Penn State with the bioethics program, I have continued to collaborate on projects through that program. I was part of the Viral Imaginations Project, which was actually documenting the experiences of Pennsylvanians through creative artwork and writing throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And Dr. Karen Kiefer-Boyd was also a part of that collaboration as well. And so continuing to develop research in that vein. I've also had invitations to publish interdisciplinarily on my dissertation research. Like I said, was violence against women, and I received an invitation to publish my work in the Journal of Radiology of Nursing. So sometimes you can find things outside the discipline of art education, and that's been a really interesting connection to make as well.
Thank you, Lauren. Zena.
So as I had mentioned, and Lauren just reiterated about the networking. So when I graduated, I was still teaching at the College of New Jersey, and I really needed to figure out what my next steps were going to be and where my passion was. So I ended up, I was working almost full-time at the College of New Jersey, and I was lecturing part-time at the University of the Arts. And I ended up quitting both of those positions. And it was easy for me to do that because it was just too much. And I needed to really figure out where my focus and, like I said, my passion. So I have been so blessed that I was able, during my PhD journey, that I was able to author a course called Introduction to Visual Arts, Art 1. And I was offered to continue to keep teaching it when I graduated. So I am still working at Penn State, and I'm very happy with it. I love the course so much. My instructional designers on here, Brendan, who I've become very friendly with and close with, and Anna. So full circle, I never left Penn State. I graduated, but I never left, and I'm very, very happy about that. I love the course, and the course really was everything that I taught for 10 years in public school that I saw was so exclusive in curriculum. I was able to transform and make it inclusive. And there's no mention in this art historical class that I teach online of anything of an artist that I'm sure the students know coming into it. So they walk away really having a different grasp on art history. And one of the modules specifically was something that I was exposed to during the PhD program, which was Judy Chicago's archives at Penn State. So I was able to include that into the curriculum and now offer it to the World Campus students all over the world, which I think is just really beautiful because I was one of those students at one time during the MPS program. So I never left. I'm still there. On top of still teaching at Penn State, which I hope continues, I am authoring my own book, and that is kind of an ode to Karen of Judy Chicago. I am also writing a book with Marissa McClure-Sweeney, who was a huge part of my dissertation, who was an outside member, a mother scholar who allowed for me to see my data and everything from an ethical standpoint. So Marissa McClure and I are still working together. I'm also writing an article about my interaction with Dr. Nell Noddings, who was my theorist during my dissertation. She unfortunately just recently passed away, and she was from New Jersey. I was able to meet her. She kind of was like an outside committee member for my dissertation, even though she wasn't technically I would meet with her at her home. And I was very blessed to be able to be the last person that she gave guidance to for a dissertation. And I think it needs to be written about, of all that she gave to me and how she transformed my life as a mother and as a scholar. And I will forever include care ethics into everything that I do and speak of it. So yeah, so that's, I'm authoring books, I'm illustrating potentially for Penn State, for ag sciences. I was just connected to that. So that was a big thing for me. Then the other thing, which Anna's here with me, Anna and another colleague of ours, we were named and awarded a faculty fellow scholar for Penn State, which is a really prestigious position. So the three of us are creating curriculum of employing VR into our online classes so that students have more of a virtual space to be able to collaborate and connect. And Anna and I are going to be doing that over the 2 courses that we teach together. So there's been a lot going on. And I think that this just lends to show that it doesn't need to be a tenured track faculty position, even though that's great if that's what you decide. But there's so many other opportunities out there.
Thank you, Zena. So we have one more question and then we can open it up to discussion. What would you recommend to your former self who was still enrolled in the program? What recommendations do you have for the current graduate students? And we will begin with Jeff.
So specifically in regards to the application process, and this has been mentioned by others, but it was something that I would give advice to myself, is just gathering documentation of your experience. I felt like I had really good documentation from my K-12 teaching, but I was not very good at documenting specifically my teaching experiences as a graduate student, syllabi and student work and photographs, just good documentation of the work I was doing, because many applications ask for specifically like undergraduate student examples or course syllabi of courses that you had taught. And that felt like a little bit of an effort to kind of dig up those things, going back into Canvas to see if I could export some student work. And I'm finding that practice of documentation is continuing to be valuable now that I'm in my current position. I continue to have annual reviews. I just had a review at the end of November where I had to submit to get reappointed for a second year, and showing evidence of the work that I was doing. And so continuing those practices of documentation of student work, of taking photos or videos just to demonstrate my work and practices as an educator and a researcher.
Thank you, Jeff. Melissa?
So, being doctoral students and candidates and then graduates, we're all pretty type A, right? We're all perfectionists, we're overachievers. We want to be right on task with everything that we're doing. So I have four things that I would suggest. One, eat well and take care of yourself and get enough sleep. And that's like, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do. It's okay to say no sometimes. You don't have to do everything and be everything for everyone all of the time. Be selective in what you're doing. If things are stopping you from the work and your goals academically, then get them out of your life a little bit. Remember, it's a temporary sacrifice. It's not going to be the rest of your life. It is for a period of time that you are just going to give everything you've got to get this degree done. And then you get to go back and relax and balance again. The next thing is walk, exercise, do something physical that requires you to get out of your research space. This is really important for your mental health. Our brains grow just so much while we're doing this, and we're learning this learning curve that's straight up. You've got to do something physical and counterbalance that so that you can de-stress. And then finally, if you don't know how to cook, I would suggest you learn how to cook, because it's very relaxing. It's a simple way to de-stress. It's something creative that you can still use those creative juices in your brain, but it's really kind of edifying to sit down and eat a wonderfully cooked meal at home that you made and take the satisfaction in that creative moment. So that's what I would recommend and suggest to everybody.
That's beautiful, Melissa. Thank you. Luke?
Sure. So my advice is kind of going back to the job search stuff, some things that I wish I had known when I started the job search. I think one thing is trying to be kind of savvy about the priorities of the programs you're applying to. Those aren't always foregrounded in the job listing. There'll sometimes be a brief description of the institution, but it's worth looking at, right? Is the school an R1 or an R2, or is it more teaching focused? Does it have a grad program, or does it just serve undergrads? Does the language on the department or the university's website emphasize teaching, scholarship, community engagement, or other priorities? What's the university's strategic plan, right? They all have one. If you Google university name strategic plan, you'll find some PDF somewhere that it might behoove you to familiarize yourself with or address the bullet points of, or things like that. Two reasons that it's useful to do this, right, is one, it can make sure the place is a good fit for you based on what your kind of goals or intentions are in your like post-grad school career. The other reason it's useful to do this, right, if you are up for anything, I felt that I was interested in working at either a more research focused or a more teaching focused institution, or anywhere on the kind of spectrums between, right, that mingle those priorities. It's useful to have that information to make sure you frame yourself in a way that's appropriate for the institution that you're meeting with or interviewing with or talking with. But looking back, I think the first place that I was invited to do like an extended kind of on-campus interview, they seemed pretty excited to have me, but I think they were not completely they were, I think, in R2s, they were pretty teaching focused with a research focus as well. But I think I had internalized, it was my first rodeo, and also I'd internalized, right, Penn State's intense, R1 research focus. And the way I presented myself was a very research centric way, which I think may have made, based on kind of my like debriefing conversations and things like that, some of the committee members wary that like whether I would commit myself to that institution or whether I would just like bide my time there and then bounce for an R1 down the line, which is not something I planned on doing, right? I would have been more than happy to work at that place, but the me I put forward might not have given that impression, right? Another just kind of side thing, logistical thing is if you're applying to state schools, you can usually look up the actual salaries of people that are working at the school and at the institution and what their starting salaries were, which can be really helpful if you do eventually get a job offer in terms of like negotiating salaries if they do try to lowball you, like some folks have mentioned, right? Schools will do that. But it also, even earlier in the stage, when you're like determining the viability of even applying to a place, it can be helpful because it can give you a realistic look at like what you'll probably be making there, and you can cross-reference that with like Zillow or something like that to make sure the place is livable, right? This has been particularly helpful for my family since, as I kind of mentioned, right, my partner is disabled and doesn't work, so we have to be mindful that my income, right, will be sufficient for us to live wherever we displace ourselves for a job. And so that's another avenue of information that can be useful, that would have been helpful for me to know from the start.
Thank you, Luke. Lauren?
I think I'm just going to reiterate some of the things that Luke had said. One thing that I also encountered was the teaching versus the research school kind of interview. And that is a really important thing to look at, and something that I also kind of encountered within my search. I also have, many years of teaching in my background, and so was also very open to both of those type of settings. However, it's really important to think about how you're going to structure, how you respond to your questions based on whether teaching or research is the emphasis. Another thing that I would like to add is the importance of saving everything, even from your prior career. When I was looking at applications, I really needed to really dig deep from my K-12 experiences, which were kind of on a flash drive in the bottom of a drawer. So having to pull those out, if you have them earlier before, the devices that they're on expire, it might be good to get those out and start loading and filing those things together, and also just continuing to gather throughout your PhD process. Another thing that I would really recommend is, again, looking at what the applications are looking for. And some of those things might be something like, are they looking for a lot of years of teaching skills or a lot of background in K-12 schools? Some people that go into K-12 have more of a museum background, or they possibly have an art background that they haven't worked with a lot of students. One thing that you can do to kind of prepare yourself for those things, if you know that they're going to be asking for those later, is to give yourself those experiences while you're in the PhD program. Volunteer somewhere so that you have some experience working with young students. If you haven't taught a class, see if there's a way that you can get the experience actually teaching a class with somebody at a higher ed level. So really looking at those applications and saying, where is the gaps in what I have to offer versus what they're asking for? And I think that's a really worthwhile thing to kind of work on as you're going through the program. And then I think the other thing when I think about going through the PhD is to remember that everyone wants you to succeed within this program. I think sometimes when you come in, especially, if you're coming from a different career and not straight through school, it's very intimidating. It can feel very overwhelming. And to remember that despite the imposter syndrome, everyone is on your side and everyone wants you to do well and thrive. And I think that that's just such a strong outlook to take whenever you're moving through your studies.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, last but not least, Zena.
So I can't really lend any suggestions for a job. But I will say from a mental health standpoint that really needs to be more of a focus, I feel like, in the PhD program. I did not do it for myself. I focused everywhere else except on myself. I had a hysterectomy a year prior to going into the PhD program, and my body was all out of sorts. And during the program, there was a lot of sitting, there was a lot of time commitment, and I really did not focus on myself at all. And that was a big thing. So now that I'm out of it, I really think that I should have focused more on myself and my health during it, because without your health and without a positive outlook on yourself, you're not going to be able to give it your all. Even though I think that I did give it my all, I probably could have given more if I would have really thought about things that made me happy besides my children and so on. So I think my suggestion to you is to really, what are you passionate about? What makes you happy? And do more of it during the program. And whether that be along with your cohort. I mean, Lauren and Melissa and I speak very often to them. And that's been a really nice, beautiful friendship that was developed during this program, and we helped each other out, which I'm very grateful for. So the other thing too is this imposter syndrome is you're amazing. I mean, 1 or 2% of the world has this degree, right? And a very wise woman who's in here once said to us that, and this is only from the woman's standpoint, but you become invisible. So having that PhD, you stay visible. And that's something that has really stuck with me and made me get through the program too. So just know that what you're doing and where you're going to go, it's absolutely incredible. And you're going to change the world in some capacity, whether it be staying in academia or doing something else. But all that you learn and all that your growth during Penn State is going to, be something really positive for this world. So I think just that positivity of staying within yourself during this program and how you can give it to others too is really important. So yeah, that's all that I have to say.
Great. Thank you so much to all of the panelists. We're going to open it up to discussion now. So if you have any questions for them as a group or to individuals, please speak up. It's very informal, so any questions you might have or any experience you would like to share for those of you who are still in the program or hypothetical questions, this is your chance.
Any advice on campus visits?
I'll give advice just generally that applies to campus visits and interviews. I was given the advice several times just to be your most authentic self. I think it's easy, you know, when you look at a program and you see they have specific qualities to try and like match to them, like, oh, I've done some of that work, but I think you want someone to accept who you are as a scholar and as an educator. And we're in kind of a pre-meeting, we were talking about this. I would like to say that something that helped me was so when you do a campus visit, you usually do a job talk where you talk about your teaching and your research. And I talked about teaching in the elementary school, and I told a really powerful story, and I got a little bit emotional, not like trying to be like, oh, if I'm emotional, they'll like, but it was authentic, you know, like I intentionally chose a story that I knew I was very passionate about, and it wasn't about teaching undergrads. It wasn't about my dissertation work. It was about a story with a fifth grader and just this powerful story that I could tell. So I think just being your most authentic self, and then it's just kind of a matter of time to where you apply to a place that you're interested in and they are interested in you. Everyone's a qualified candidate, but I think just finding that right match just can take, you just never know when that will happen.
And Maggie, also the other thing too. So when I was at the College of New Jersey, I became very close with the faculty there, and I kind of picked their brain about what they look for interviews. And one of my friends now, she said, what we look for is just dialogue within the interview that has nothing really to pertain to the interview. And I asked why, and she said, it's because I know that when that interviewee is in a classroom speaking with students, this is probably a lot of the dialogue that's going to consist of what's happening in that learning space. So, you know, when we have somebody come in, we know that they're going to answer these questions kind of very academically and what we want to hear. But when we kind of go off filter and it's not so much about exactly the job, that's what we really hone in on as a person. So that authentic self, kind of like what Jeff said, just being yourself and not trying to be on this display and stage of being this perfect individual for this job, right? I think that also lends to it too. So just knowing that it's not just the answers to the questions that they're asking, but just how you interact with them from an organic standpoint.
You know, and one thing I'd like to add too, I totally agree with what both of them said. One of my final interviews was over 3 days. So I arrived on a Sunday night, had an event. I went all day the next day, and then I went the morning until noon on the third day. And so the one thing after the first full day, I was talking to Scott, and it was like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night before I got back to my room. And I was at the hotel, and I was so exhausted. Like I was just so physically worn out. And it kind of scared me because I had never felt that way before. And I was talking to him, and I'm like, what's going on? He's like, just think about it. He's like, you've been on for 2 days and you've got one more day to go. And so be aware of that, like be really well rested, be eating well when you go for those in-person interviews, because you're on the whole time. And you know, you get a break when you're back in your hotel room, but you know, you're on. And so for me, that was just really emotionally exhausting. And nobody really prepared me for that. Like I wasn't really aware that that would be an outcome of these in-person interviews, because you think about it, what's riding on this interview? I mean, even though I go and I give my authentic self, right? I really want this job or I wouldn't have applied, and there are financial needs and I want to move on to the next chapter of my life. All this stuff is still in your head. And when I went and did mine, I was still writing. I was still working on my dissertation. I still had goals and deadlines and like all the other pressures of life there. And so that was just one thing that really was surprising to me was how, and I've done interviews before, but these at this level and at this time in my life were just really emotionally exhausting. And I was happy about it and everything, but I was just like totally wiped out. So just be aware of that could be something that happens too.
I feel like my advice is it tends to be on the more like nuts and boltsy side of things. So in terms of just like useful information, if you are not, or folks here are not aware, like common things that you'll likely be asked to do at an on-campus visit interview are to give like a shop talk, which is like a 1-hour presentation on your research and pedagogy and kind of focus and interest and direction. Another thing you'll be expected to do usually is to teach a class and be observed teaching that class. You'll usually slip into someone else's course and lead a session in that class. And there'll usually be a series of face-to-face interviews that are quite long. And then a lot of like informal interactions, like people have been mentioning, going out to dinner with people and stuff like that, where you have to like be an authentic self if you believe a single authentic self exists, or perform authenticity if you're a more performative minded person, depending on how you consider your identity or what level of social anxiety you have around yourself and the way you act around other people. And kind of tying into what other folks have said before too, and kind of what I said about like remixing materials for applications, I found in order to like be able to prepare those kinds of materials, the teaching and the presentation, while writing a dissertation, all that stuff, it was helpful to have had experience teaching undergraduate art educators at Penn State and have had experience presenting on stuff I was doing at conferences. So I would recommend, even before you're doing any sort of job hunting stuff, and Penn State's really good at encouraging this, right? Finding opportunities to teach and finding opportunities to present on your work. Because then when it came time for me to pull together that job talk, or when it came time for me to develop a lesson to share, right, that I was going to be observed at, I could draw upon prior work is part of creating this new thing, right? Rather than having to conjure something from whole cloth to get a job that I might not get on top of writing a dissertation, right? Which is just not something that I think any of us would have the bandwidth to do, right? On top of it just being exhausting anyway, right?
Thank you, Luke. I think we have one final question for Zena in the chat from Ian about your transition from getting a master's in art education to PhD. That's a great question. You're muted, Zena.
Okay, sorry about that. I actually met Ian about a month ago. So thanks for the question. I think Ilham could probably also chime in on this, since her and I both did our master's at Penn State and transitioned into the PhD program. So I felt so there was no question about it. This was where I wanted to go, right? I felt very ready, and knowing the faculty already prior made that transition a lot smoother for me. And also it made it know who I wanted to work with for my PhD, because during your master's program, as I'm sure you know now, you start to learn a lot about the faculty and their research and kind of where you want to go with yours and what you're interested in. So it made my interest kind of known prior to going into the program that I wanted to do something with feminist art. I had originally started really wanting to transform curriculum and art history from a feminist standpoint, which I ultimately did in Art 1. And that was during my PhD program. So it was a really smooth transition. And like I said, you get to know the faculty a lot better and their research. It's a totally different experience as far as commitment goes, I'll say, much more intense. But the growth that I had seen, and I said this earlier, that I'd seen during my master's program, like if I saw it during my master's program, oh my goodness, the PhD program is going to be crazy. And it was. I mean, I walked away from that in May so proud of myself because of what I achieved, and I never thought that would happen, right? But I knew it could happen because during my master's program, I saw that growth, and I got to form connections and relationships with Dr. Carpenter and with, Dr. Kiefer Boyd and Dr. Knockel and all these, wonderful faculty that are world known. And here I am at the greatest institution in my eyes, being able to continue this. So I'm like a walking billboard for Penn State. I mean, I'm going to tell you apply, but I think it's a really beautiful transition. So I don't know if Ilham can add anything to that. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, Ilham.
No, at all. Mine is a little bit different because my master was in MFA and transition to that to PhD in art education is a little bit hard, especially for me because of the language barrier and all the stuff that I was experiencing that time. So I think it was so hard for me, especially the first semester, because I was so shocked and I couldn't, even get some simple discussions in a class. So it was I was crying after each class and I was saying, oh my God, I cannot make it. I cannot do it. But the support that I received from my cohort and my professors, especially Dr. Kiefer Boyd, I love you, Karen, was the only thing that made me do it, So yeah, I think it's a great experience. So I strongly suggest it. It's worth all the difficulties,
The other thing I'll just add to that too is like during your master's program at Penn State, you're being exposed to all this terminology and theoretical positioning that you probably didn't have prior to this, right? So that's another thing too, is like you're going into the PhD program knowing a lot about your pedagogical stance, right? Which is great because it allows you to really absorb a lot of what you're being taught even more so. If I would have went into the PhD program after getting my master's, teaching high school, and then taking time off, I probably would have lost some of that, but it was like so fresh in my mind too. So I'll just contribute that as well.
Thank you so much. Any final thoughts or questions? Oh,
I have a question. I have a question about when you were looking for job positions, did you find any jobs that is not related to schools and universities?
I applied to a couple things that were state jobs. So like in the state of Michigan, some were consultants. So like as somebody with a PhD, I could go in and consult. And I know Zena and I talked about like just looking at those kinds of jobs and applying to those. And I did apply to some of those. Bigger think tanks could be a good solution versus smaller people asking for a consultant. I did do a couple things in New York City and they're like, oh, you're like, we don't want a PhD, like that's too much. So they really wanted either one, they didn't understand what a consultant is and does, or two, they just wanted somebody they could kind of talk to a little bit on the side and not really pay them well. So yeah, there are a lot of things out there that you can apply for. Government jobs, working for the government that are maybe touch on some of the other skills you get as a PhD person, right? The research or the data collection or those things. I don't mind consulting, but for me, I really like being around people. So it didn't really work out for me that way, but yeah.
Yeah, Ilham, so I know your kind of interests, right? With being with you and mine. So after I graduated, I started looking into possibilities of curriculum redesign for College Board. There's a lot of openings, a lot of virtual positions for that. I sent some of them to Lauren because she has an art history background too. All these little kind of webs that you have some experience in, that title is going to help you a lot, right? So that's a big thing. But and also how can what your research did impact a company, you know, and where do you want to put that energy into? So yeah, I mean, for you, I know there's probably, and you and I could talk about this, but there's so many other things that you could do, right? And other avenues and spider webs that you can go down. So yeah, but for me, it was really, like Melissa said, Department of Education, College Board, things were like art history that I could infuse that feminist outlook and care ethics into, instead of this very kind of linear approach to education, more of putting that progressive footprint into education and not make it so standardized was really big for me.
Great, thank you all so much as we come to the end of an hour and a half, which I'm very glad we decided on that amount of time because I think that was necessary. It's been such an honor to work with each of you in some capacity in the past. I believe I have worked with each of you, and it's been such a pleasure and honor. And I think this was an incredibly beneficial session, and things that graduate students here can take away. And I will also share the recording with everyone who was invited and couldn't attend. And if you're interested in sharing it and passing it on, you're welcome to do so. So thank you all so much. Those of you who are still graduate students, you are welcome to any of the CPAD events. And the next one is on Friday, March 17th. From 2 to 4 p.m. online and at the CPAD lab, which is Borland 113. And we're going to have 3 amazing VR exhibitions presented by Ian, Ilham, and Glynis. And those of you who are able to join us in person will be able to wear Oculus headsets and experience their exhibitions in virtual reality. So CPAD is here for you, to support you, to create that sense of graduate community. And we hope to stay in touch with all of the recent graduates and see where life takes them in the future. So thank you so much, and please keep in touch.
Thank you, Anna, for having this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.